Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to today's tropical weather outlook for July 27th, 2026. And today, we are going to focus on the Pacific as things continue to heat up there. We have Hurricane Genevieve, which is active in the eastern Pacific right now, which has reached a peak intensity of Category 5. But that might not be the only Category 5 storm that'll develop here in the Pacific. We might have multiple Category 5s here in the Pacific in the next few days when all is said and done, as we are tracking another storm in the Western Pacific that might be of trouble. So lots going on here in the Pacific, and obviously we all expected this given that this year is a very strong El Nino, and we typically see lots of activity in the tropics in the Pacific because of El Nino, especially in a year like this year. But we're going to break it all down for you, and we're going to go over what to expect here over the next several days as things, once again, continue to heat up here in the Pacific. So, enough of the intro. Let's hop straight into it since there's a lot to talk about. Starting off by taking a look at the wide tropics of the entire world here. And first of all, you can just already see how active things are across the Pacific here. We have two active hurricanes right now in the eastern and central Pacific, Fosto and Genevieve, and of course we have a tropical storm, Dolphin. This is the other storm we need to watch for in terms of potentially being a very powerful typhoon, as they're called in the Western Pacific, but the phenomenon is literally the exact same. Hurricane, typhoon, they're all tropical cyclones, but Dolphin here is poised to potentially very quickly strengthen and maybe become yet another Category 5 here in the Pacific, while Genevieve just came off a Category 5 peak intensity. So let's hop over now to the National Hurricane Center bulletin here, and really quickly just to touch on this, because we're not really going to touch on it for the rest of the video. The Atlantic is looking nice and quiet right now, nothing expected over the next week, so we're not really going to talk about the Atlantic today. The Pacific, though, obviously active right now. We have Hurricane Fosto, 80 miles per hour, pressure of 986 millibars, moving on off to the west-northwest here. We'll touch on this in a little bit and talk about its track. And again, it's looking like it's going to stay north of Hawaii, although maybe there might be occasional gusty winds and thunderstorms from the remnants of Fosto as it passes to the north. But Genevieve here is the main talk of the town, which luckily, I should say, is not a threat to land. So this is mainly just, eye candy. I guess the right word is to use eye candy since it's not, really threatening in any major way. But this is mainly just eye candy for hurricane trackers, although it is quite a beautiful storm, as I'll show you here in a little bit. But maximum sustained winds are at 155 miles per hour, minimum pressure of 929 millibars. This just came off a Category 5 peak, although judging by the satellite, as I'll show you in a second here, I think maybe we could be heading for another Category 5 peak here with Genevieve. So let's take a look at the satellite shot across the Pacific right now, and very obviously here Genevieve sticks out like a sore thumb, and it has that classic hurricane look with outflow expansive on all quadrants. No wind shear affecting this, no dry air impeding on this storm, unlike the last few hurricanes here in the eastern Pacific, or a few storms in general. Genevieve was able to fully take advantage of its environment and rapidly intensify, and it made it all the way up to the final boss stage, Category 5 hurricane status. And you can see here by the satellite shot, it almost looks like it's kind of improving once again in the latest frames. And you can especially see that by the CDO here becoming more round. And usually when that happens, that's a sign of re-intensification. So maybe that might happen here. And it still has a little bit of time in order to be able to do so. So we'll see whether or not it actually happens. But a very beautiful hurricane and photogenic storm nonetheless. And I'll show you a satellite shot of Genevieve that makes this look even more photogenic. Trust me, you will be impressed. Moving on to the Central Pacific now, just to show you how things are there, as we have Hurricane Fosto, and you can see why it is weakening now. It's still a hurricane, but it's probably not going to last much longer, getting ripped apart by shear. Also dry air as well, since it's definitely in its vicinity, and it's going to continue to pound on Fosto as it continues to move on off to the west-northwest here. It'll be a decent pace away, just to the north of Hawaii. Again, as I said before, maybe some of these outer rain bands will affect some of the northern islands here. So maybe we might get some tropical storm watches or warnings for some of the northern islands of Hawaii here. But in terms of any major impacts, no need to worry. And then just to really quickly hint at you about, the next topic, you can see here, yes, that is a tropical storm, and that is Tropical Storm Dolphin, which is in the Western Pacific. Was basically developing as it was moving into the Central Pacific, from the Central Pacific into the Western Pacific here. If you remember, it was Invest 92C here in the Central Pacific, but I guess it developed as soon as it got to the Western Pacific, and it is now Dolphin. And already by the satellite, shot here, you could already see how well Dolphin is coming along. But again, we'll focus on that more, and we'll focus on it specifically in just a little bit. But once again, I really quickly want to touch up on Fosto. I don't want to completely ignore it. Although, again, not much to talk about. The cone of uncertainty is almost entirely to the north of Hawaii. Maybe, again, one of these northern islands here, you still need to watch for potential impacts. The wind field here on Fosto is not that, bad. It is, not super small. So, again, it wouldn't shock me if some of these winds are felt on the northern islands here, but something that you should note, it is going to weaken, and maybe it might already be a depression or maybe a remnant low by the time it passes just to the north of Hawaii. So nothing more than just gusty winds and some potential heavy downpours or something like that for a brief period of time. Probably as we get towards the middle of the week here, but other than that, not much else there is to say about Fosto. Moving on to Genevieve. And this is the very pretty satellite shot that I wanted to show you. This is the high-res visible satellite shot, and once again, it just kind of puts into perspective just how beautiful of a storm Genevieve is. And you can very clearly see on this satellite shot, too, the classic stadium effect with the eye, and that's typically something you see in very well-developed and very strong, intense hurricanes, and Genevieve has that feature, so it definitely fits the category of strong and intense hurricanes. And then you can see just the bands swirling inward, very well developed band structure, and of course, very well developed outflow channels as well. In fact, you could especially see them once again advancing here, kind of these clouds fanning on off in all directions here. These upper level cirrus clouds, definitely indicative of very strong and very well-developed outflow, and obviously that is what is helping this storm to become as strong as it is. High-end Category 4, low-end Category 5, maybe might make a run for Category 5 intensity once again, because it's sitting at 155 miles per hour right now, and it has a little bit of time to do so. Probably has till maybe tomorrow afternoon, and then eventually here, I guess it's going to move, further on off to the northwest, enough so that it's going to be moving into cooler water, so it might not be able to intensify as much. In fact, it'll probably start weakening, and that'll happen here as it moves on off into the weekend, and probably by the end of the weekend, I'd assume it would probably die off as it moves, very far off to the northwestern Pacific into cooler waters. But intensification, another brief period of intensification, potentially back to Category 5 intensity, could still happen, and judging by the satellite frame here, wouldn't shock me. It's definitely improving in appearance today, and either way, regardless, absolutely, deserves to be in the category of probably one of the most photogenic storms we've seen in the tropics so far this year, and it definitely looks to be holding to that look, to it right now. So, with that being said, I want to show you sea surface temperature anomalies across the Pacific right now, because I want to show you what is fueling all of these strong storms here. First off, of course, our very strong El Nino, which is developing in the tropical Pacific right now, with these very, very warm sea surface temperature anomalies stretching pretty much as far west as the Central Pacific here, where we have sea surface temperature anomalies as warm as 1, 2, and even the slither here of 3 degrees Celsius really beginning to develop and stretch westward, but also across the tropical Eastern Pacific right now, near record to record sea surface temperature anomalies are very widespread, and obviously Genevieve here was able to tap into that, and really, because it also had very favorable atmospheric conditions, obviously you saw what happened. It immediately was able to intensify and become a Category 5 hurricane. But it's just incredible, and it again goes to show the kind of setup we have this year in the Pacific. But these sea surface temperatures extend all the way out to the west here, and we also have quite a few sea surface temperature anomalies here in the western Pacific that are at near record levels as well, especially in the eastern and northeastern part of the basin here. And that is what Dolphin is going to tap into over the next few days, as it generally moves on off to the northwest here. Well, kind of moving in a westerly direction right now, but it's going to turn off into a northwesterly direction. And once again, look at the sea surface temperature anomalies that it has, and widespread areas of up to 2 degrees Celsius above normal as well. So quite a warm Pacific, and definitely one of the main factors, besides El Nino, although it's kind of being helped by the El Nino, that is fueling all of these strong storms, especially already considering the fact that it's still July and we, have a long season still to go of probably much more strong storms to come in both basins here. But since we mentioned the Western Pacific now, let's switch gears now to Dolphin, which again is probably going to become, in my opinion, not might sound very aggressive to say, but trust me, especially when it comes to the Western Pacific, it is not aggressive. But I think Dolphin is probably going to become our next Category 5 here of the Pacific Basin. And you could already see on the satellite imagery here, it has a very good structure. We have these convective curling bands that are rotating around the core structure of the storm. So it already has a very well, built structure going for it, combined with the very warm sea surface temperature anomalies it is in. This is probably already going to bomb out and really intensify here, starting more than likely very soon. And the track, once again, more than likely moving on off to the west now, but then maybe around 24 hours out from now, at least according to the 12Z guidance, it starts moving on off to a west-northwest to northwest track, and it's probably going to remain that way for at least the next week. And then maybe it'll bend off to the west here. And more than likely, for the entire time of all of these model guidance here, and to be fair, kind of a little bit shocking that we have very limited model guidance on this storm right now, although I'm pretty sure we probably will get a little bit more. But the entire time, this is going to be a tropical cyclone, very likely. In fact, probably even a major hurricane strength cyclone or typhoon for pretty much almost the entire duration of these forecast tracks here, going all the way out to 10 days. And it's just going to go to show just how much of a monster Dolphin is shaping up to be. And I think that's perfectly represented here by the ensembles from the European this afternoon. And you could see virtually all of the ensembles here make Dolphin a strong storm. Some already starting within just the next 1 to 2 days here, and wouldn't shock me. I mean, as I showed you with the satellite shot, this storm already looks like it's beginning to take off and rapidly intensify, but virtually guaranteed at least in the next 2 or 3 days, this will rapidly intensify and probably become a major strength storm, and very likely too, I think, or very possible, it becomes a Category 5 storm as well, and then it's going to move on off to the west-northwest here. But there's quite a bit of uncertainty with the track, especially once we get beyond 10 days or so and we start getting into the 2-week time frame or the week 2 time frame, because beyond that, this might be a potential impact for Japan or China or Korea here. Some landmass, especially if this continues on a west-northwest to northwest track and maybe even bends off to the west here, you would think that at some point this might run into some land. So this might be a land threat in the very, very long term. But this is more than likely something that we will absolutely be watching here in the Western Pacific for the better part of probably the next 10 days to maybe even the next 2 weeks. So this is truly going to be one of those long-tracked, slow burns of just watching a storm blow up and become a massive monster, ace producer here in the Western Pacific. And that's another thing too, very guaranteed that this storm is more than likely going to rack up a lot of ace in the Western Pacific. And yeah, this is going to be a storm that we're going to have to watch for a very long time here, more than likely over the next 1 to 2 weeks. So, and especially because of the fact that this is literally starting or developing as far east in the Western Pacific as you can get. And these kind of formations are not very uncommon in years like this year, where we have very, very strong El Niños. And I'll actually touch upon why that is, and kind of, the other forcing and mechanisms behind the development that we're seeing here in just a little bit. But I showed you the European ensembles. Here's a look at the GFS over the next week here. And you can see Dolphin initially moves on a westerly direction, and then roughly two or so days out from now begins to move in a west-northwesterly track. And then it continues on that path for pretty much the next week. And then beyond that, we'll have to see whether or not it bends back to the west. That might put China at risk, or it continues on off to the west-northwest here and eventually might run into Japan. And then, interestingly enough, beyond that, on the periphery, we might get another storm that will develop here in the Western Pacific as well. And the GFS run here, taking this out to well beyond 10 days, brings this into Japan and then into South Korea as a pretty formidable looking storm. But you can't take those solutions with great seriousness just yet, because whatever happens here beyond 7 days, this is still going to be well out to sea, or well away from land 7 days out. So any land impacts that do happen will be in the week 2 time frame. So lots of watching here in the tropics in the Western Pacific. So if you are anywhere in China, South Korea, or Japan, you're going to want to be keeping a very, very close eye out here on Dolphin for the next at least week to, again, maybe even 2 weeks. And then we have another storm which is developing here, more than likely about a week out to the periphery of Dolphin, and then maybe something else that tries to get going here. Lots of things happening in the Western Pacific. And again, just goes to show just how active and favorable the Pacific Basin is overall right now. And moving on to the Eastern Pacific here, taking a look at the GFS, we have Genevieve here, which continues on off in its west-northwesterly track, eventually moves on off to the west, but by the time it does that and it gets to around Saturday or Sunday, it's probably dying off here as it moves into cooler waters, and will not be much of a threat or concern to anybody. And let's just take you to the Central Pacific right now just to see what it does here. And yeah, no need to be worried, especially if you are in Hawaii and in the Central Pacific here. Genevieve just moves well off to the northeast and stays far away from the island chain. And then it kind of looks like the GFS goes a little bit quiet here in the Eastern Pacific, interestingly enough. I'm not sure if that'll actually last, as I'll mention here in just a little bit. But I'm pretty sure, honestly, there probably are signals waiting beyond Genevieve, and definitely for sure Genevieve is probably going to be the first of what will be multiple very strong storms here in the Pacific. So, as I mentioned before, why are all of these strong storms happening right now? Why are we going to have 2 Category 5s here in the Pacific in probably just a span of a few days? And obviously, the number one reason behind that is, of course, El Niño forcing, which is, allowing for lots of favorability in the atmosphere. Of course, as well, the oceanic aspect with near record warm sea surface temperature anomalies all across the Pacific. But, of course, with that El Niño forcing, we get very strong westerly winds here. And as I, especially described before, these westerly winds will absolutely help enhance and intensify this El Niño, which is really reaching, record strength in the Pacific right now. But these westerly winds as well also really help with tropical cyclone development as they create lots of vorticity in the lower levels of the atmosphere, which helps to close off low-level vortexes and eventually sprout and develop into tropical cyclones. And these westerly winds here, man, are they just persistent, and they will continue to be persistent even for just the next 2 weeks here, it seems, in the Pacific. And you can especially see why we are really seeing things ramp up right now. We're seeing a especially strong burst of westerly winds right now in the Pacific. In fact, this might even be, near record strong. And then it, loosens it up a little bit as we get into August. But obviously, with this westerly wind burst alone, we were able to get, and will very likely get, 2 Category 5 strength storms out of this. And then maybe we might be in for another round, especially as we get into August, of yet another strong pulse of westerly wind bursts. But even then, in between, you just have persistent westerly wind anomalies here throughout the entire tropical Pacific, which is going to only help El Nino continue to strengthen and obviously set the background state and the overall atmospheric state in a very favorable way for more tropical development. And of course, one of the reasons behind these very strong westerly wind bursts is the MJO, which obviously means rising motion and rising air in the atmosphere, which helps fuel these westerly wind anomalies. And you can see right now the MJO is in phase 8, so that's in the western, or the, it is in the western hemisphere, that's what I meant to say, and the eastern Pacific. And then the MJO kind of circles back to the null phase here, but then immediately moves back out into the Pacific as we get into early August. So the MJO stationary in the Pacific and kind of stalling and, dilly-dallying and mingling in the Pacific, and every time it tries to move into another phase, and immediately goes back into the null and moves back into the Pacific. Absolutely, once again, a strong sign of a stout standing wave of rising air in the Pacific. And of course, that is caused none other than our very strong El Nino that we have right now. So all of these factors are what has helped fueling all the strong storms we are seeing in the Pacific right now. And you bet that more than likely, this is definitely not the end. I mean, it's only July, once again, getting towards the end of July, but still, we at least have 3 or 4 months left of what will probably be a handful of very strong storms here in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, we probably have at least several more major hurricanes to go. Wouldn't be surprised if we make it up to 7 or even 8, maybe even 9 major hurricanes in the eastern Pacific, and definitely a lot more to come as well, with super typhoons as well in the western Pacific, meaning high-end Category 4, Category 5 strength storms. And we're probably going to crank out even more of these, long track monster ace producing typhoons in the western Pacific. And boy, you think it's bad now in late July, you have not seen the western Pacific really cranks up by the time we get to September, October, and November. And I bet for sure that is probably going to be the case this year. So lots of activity here in the Pacific over the next few weeks. Luckily, though, just to briefly mention it, nothing happening in the Atlantic. So nothing to track in the Atlantic. So if you are in the Atlantic basin, you can worry, or you don't have to worry right now. Enjoy your plans, enjoy, whatever beach plans you have over the next few weeks as we get into the peak of summer now. And, take it all in. But if you are in the Pacific, especially in China and Japan and those places, you'll want to keep a very close eye out here on the tropics over the next few weeks. And we will definitely continue to do so. With that being said, I'm going to wrap it up for today's video. Hope you guys enjoyed what you saw today. If you did, I would really appreciate if you like, comment, and subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you can get videos the second I upload them to YouTube. And follow me on Twitter as well, @Danilo Evangelista, so you can get consistent updates throughout the day, and all the time, instead of having to wait for me to upload a video to YouTube, which we will do on a daily basis, and we do on a daily basis. But I upload and post, more than once a day on Twitter. And especially with very strong storms, I upload and update you down to the minute whenever we have new information that comes out when we are tracking, especially particularly dangerous situations. So make sure to follow me on Twitter as well. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe. Continue to watch the tropics here. And I'll talk to you guys again tomorrow.